Mark Stein reports that the Chicago Bulls are very confident they can pull off at least one major trade at the trade deadline to reshape their roster. He also reports that the Chicago Bulls are kind of at the center, or potentially at the center, of the NBA's trade deadline, as a lot of the other teams look at pieces they can pick off the Bulls to help their run. We're going to talk about all that, plus the future of Lonzo Ball, which got an interesting turn of events, and preview tonight's game against the Brooklyn Nets. All that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this content today, man. And just keep being things around the Chicago Bulls. Now, I want to be clear here, right? Like, the Bulls have been rumored to be making a lot of trades, or open to making a lot of trades before, and they haven't done so. And I also am somebody that looks at this and says, when there's enough smoke from enough different places, there could be a fire there. And we'll talk about why that's the case. At this point, I think everybody knows and understands why. And that if teams are really looking and waiting for the Chicago Bulls to make a move, to pull off that big trigger, is that going to be beneficial to the Bulls? Or are teams circling the Bulls because they feel confident that they can pick off some pieces for the Bulls because of their history and at a lower value than what they're actually worth, which is something you also have to look at when all this is said. But, when you look at Mark Stein and what he said recently, he says this: I can relay that I've heard the same and even a confidence emanating from the Windy City, and that the Bulls believe that they will strike at least one significant deal before the February 6th trade deadline to shed at least one high-profile veteran from their roster. This is what Mark Stein wrote. And he goes on further into this article to even mention as well that Lonzo Ball could actually be seeking a trade elsewhere, looking at the situation with that, and it could be beneficial to both Lonzo and the Chicago Bulls to go ahead and move him on somewhere. Now, I don't know how much I believe that part of things, right? When it comes to Lonzo, not to say that maybe Lonzo isn't looking at this and saying, hey, let me get my ass up out of here. Like, I can understand any veteran player looking at the Chicago Bulls' current situation with where they are with their roster and saying, hey, it may be best for me to get out of here. But I don't know if that's necessarily like where Lonzo's like pursuing to get out of here with Chicago. Keep in mind, regardless of however Lonzo Ball season finishes, he's probably going to have to sign a one-year prove-it deal again before getting any type of long-term money. Now, that's my speculation, but, we'll see what happens there. But, we'll get more on Lonzo Ball in a minute, because I do think that if the Bulls truly are looking to move Lonzo Ball, despite his injury, the injury could be the only thing. If there's some trepidation about his injury, that's really the only thing that could cause him to not necessarily be moved. But we'll talk about that. At this point, it's been ad nauseum. Basically, since before the season even started, we knew that the Chicago Bulls could be looking to move on from Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic. They are just the parts and components of this roster that, if you're looking at it going forward, just may not fit as far as the timeline, right? And hats off to them. It has nothing to do with their performance on the basketball court. I want to be clear in this. There's nothing about their play that's like, oh, let's just absolutely get them out of here. They suck. No, these guys are playing some of the best basketball in their career, and that is potentially why the Bulls are looking to strike hot here. I talked about it over on Locked on Bulls episode I dropped late last night, and that was just that there may be some thinking from this front office that they need to overcompensate for where they failed at before. Meaning that when they failed to move off of Alex Caruso, they failed to move off Andre Drummond at last year's trade deadline. Hell, they failed to take advantage of Torrey Craig, who, reportedly, Andre Drummond with the 2 second-round picks there. They failed to move on from Alex Caruso. They failed to really see where the direction of the roster was going, even though despite the rest of the NBA world seeing it, and even moving on from DeMar DeRozan, which you could have gotten more from him in the last two trade deadlines than what you got for him in free agency this past season, right? So there's maybe some of that with this front office of really looking to say, hey, we do not want to keep failing to strike where the iron is hot on these players. Let's get these players out of here while they have the most value. And when you look at it for the Chicago Bulls, the Bulls have a total of 6 players over the age of 27 on their roster. You have Nikola Vucevic, Torrey Craig, Javon Carter, Chris Duarte, Lonzo Ball. And out of those 6 players, 3 of those guys really hold value, and one potentially still does hold value in Torrey Craig, which we heard that, Torrey Craig could get 2 second-round picks back, from a team like the Milwaukee, or a second-round pick back from the Milwaukee Bucks, right? Now, you look at the other players. Nikola Vucevic he's a top 5 center in the league this year. And that's why when like Nikola Vucevic hate still happens from some people, I'm just like, do you just have an axe to grind? Like, have you not actually watched any of this season? Like, Vooch is averaging 20 and 10 on the best efficiency that he has. Like, Vooch averaging 20 and 10 isn't surprising. The efficiency that he's doing it at, though, is surprising. Vooch is shooting the ball right now 57.5% from the field. That is not just good for a Bulls uniform. That is the best in his NBA career, period. He's also shooting the ball 47% from three-point range. That is the best of his NBA career, period, right? That's what he's able to do at this point in time. And so, when you look at that for Vooch, also 83% from the free throw line, the second highest mark in his career, Vooch is getting it done. And for a league that there are a lot of teams that could use some bigs potentially, it makes some sense to go ahead and move off of Nikola Vucevic, which didn't make sense when we heard that the value could be 2 second-round picks. That's what you could have got for Andre Drummond last year at the trade deadline. And Vooch is playing so much better than that. Yes, he's a one-way player that is older, and he does only have 1 year left on his contract, which does play a part into that. But I think if you're trading Vooch, especially if it goes to a team that's actually contending, you should be able to get an unprotected first-round pick if they hold their own first-round pick in this upcoming draft because, yeah, Vooch is worth that. You look at then, of course, Zach LaVine, right? He's another player that's over the age of 27, of course. He'll be 30 in March, I believe. But you look at Zach LaVine and what he's doing this season, and he's giving some of the best two-way play of his career. And so you're able to get a player that has 2 years left on their deal after this season. Yes, they are expensive years, which that could be why it's difficult to move Zach LaVine, but you have that, right? And so I think that there is some overcompensation happening from this front office, but I'll tell you this, and this is the thing that I always say, we can't complain when the Bulls don't strike hot and then get mad and say, well, why are you moving this guy? You should keep. That's part of the reason why the Bulls are in the situation that they're in. And I see things from so many Bulls fans like, oh, no, we should absolutely keep Zach LaVine. Look at how he's playing. Yeah, and did you not see that we just did that with DeMar DeRozan? Did you not see we just did that with Alex Caruso? It's clear. This team wants to go younger. Regardless if you agree with that or not, that is what this team wants to do. Whether you think they should go younger or not, or whatever it is, that's the place that this team is in. And like I said in yesterday's episode as well, if it's a big if here, right? And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination, the Bulls should be given the benefit of the doubt that they will get it right. But if they get it right in this draft and they hold on to that top 10 pick and they get the talent and develop that talent, you got Modest. This team could be right back contending for a play-in spot with a much younger roster, and that is a completely different outlook when you're contending with a roster of 25 and younger players rather than you do it when your core is all over the age of 30 or right at 30 with Zach LaVine, right? That's a much different. When you are a young team fighting for a play-in spot, you're ascending. When you're an older team fighting for a play-in spot and getting eliminated, you're not ascending anymore. It's only going down from there, right? And so that's what this team, I think, is really looking at. When you hear things from like Mark Stein saying that the Bulls are confident they can at least swing one move, because that may be all that it takes, right? I said it, I think it was in yesterday's episode, that there is a world, and I'm not saying that this is a guarantee world or one that we should think is for sure going to happen, but there is a world in which the Bulls could move Nikola Vucevic. Yes, they'd be at a deficit at the center position, right? Make no mistake about that. You move Nikola Vucevic, you get what you get back, prioritize the picks or whatever else it is, that then you become bad enough to stay in the bottom that you need to keep your pick, and then you're adding a top 10 pick to a core, and it still has an aging Zach LaVine that's the veteran there at that point. He's over 30 at that point, but let's be clear. Zach LaVine isn't slowing down anytime soon. He's still an imperfect player, but he's not slowing down anytime soon. If Zach wants to stay, there's a world in which that gets done. But in going into more asset, and I think it's just going to take one big deal. If this Bulls team does get that one big deal that they feel, according to Mark Stein, that they're confident they can get with Nikola Vucevic, at that point, depending on, or if it's Zach, depending then, that's when you may see the Torrey Craigs traded. That's when you may see the Javon. Listen, can we please trade Javon Carter and Chris Duarte, I don't think anybody's going to be mad if you move those guys because it's just, there's some. The Chris Duarte truthers have been a little bit quieter since the season started, but don't forget, I ain't forgot you motherfuckers that was tripping about Chris Duarte being better than Ayo Dosunmu before the start of the season. Y'all were crazy. But with that said, and then maybe even Lonzo Ball. And so this trade deadline is could be. I'm not going to say going to be because one thing I've learned with this front office, anytime you expect them to zig, they zag, and not in a good way, right? But this could be a really key trade deadline for the Chicago Bulls. And really, when you really look at it, the Bulls have 14 games left before January 10th. And why is that January 10th day important? That's the day that THT's contract becomes fully guaranteed. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't still make moves after that, because they can. The trade deadline isn't until February. They got all that time to make moves, but the THT guarantee date allows you to maybe waive THT to open up another roster spot so that you can absorb another player back, one more than you send out. Keep in mind, all of the Bulls roster except THT is fully guaranteed. He becomes guaranteed January 10th. So if you do need some flexibility to be able to waive somebody to facilitate a deal to where you can absorb an extra contract than you send out. For example, you send out Zach LaVine, you want to take back 2 contracts instead of 1, right? You would have to waive THT to facilitate that, or get a third team involved, which can become a little bit tricky. It's doable, but which could become a little bit tricky. It's also funny that 14 games there also coincides with what we heard earlier in the season from Joe Cowley, that the Bulls front office wants to give this team 35 games. 14 games is at that 35-game mark that they want to give them before then they start making decisions on the direction they want to go with this roster. And so I think that, with most of the roster, reportedly open to be moved, this could be a very active trade deadline for the Chicago Bulls and Arturas Karnisovas and Mark Eversley. But the thing in this also, making moves is one thing. You got to make the right move. And that's the part where there's a lack of faith from Bulls fandom right now in this front office because, listen, they've been a year behind on basically everything that they've done so far. Every single thing that they've done so far. The inactivity is still haunting the Chicago Bulls. Look at it this way, right? The Bulls' inactivity at last year's trade deadline is in part what led to the Bulls getting Josh Giddey. And this isn't to knock on Josh Giddey as a player or not. I'm not even finna get into Josh Giddey or anything with that. But I am finna say that you now are heading into another offseason where you have to make a decision on a long-term contract for a player, and you're only going to have one season worth of data in your roster, in your building to really use. Yes, you got data from what he did with OKC, but you only got that. And so the reverberations from the inactivity at the Bulls last year's trade deadline are still going to be felt for a while, right? And so that's where you see where it comes to the Chicago Bulls. Now, I did say that we were going to get back into Lonzo, right? And I want to talk a little bit about Lonzo for this reason, is that I know Lonzo has not played a lot of games. He just hasn't played a lot for the Chicago Bulls. And for any team that's worried about, injury concerns or anything like that, but we've heard now a couple of times that Lonzo could even be easier to move than Zach LaVine. Now, I'm not saying that I necessarily believe that, but when you look at it, and this is a very small sample size, Lonzo Ball has only played 84 minutes so far this season, less than 100 minutes. But in that, the Bulls are plus 13.8 when Lonzo's on the court. We average average 15 points more per 100 possessions when Lonzo Ball is on the court. Defenses, right? When you look at opposing defenses, they do score more, 1.7 points more per 100 possessions when Lonzo's on the floor. But as a player that's not really playing a lot of minutes on average, I'm not going to hold that against him. Lonzo Ball is the only player on the Chicago Bulls right now that every year of his NBA career, he's had a plus differential. And even now, returning from injury, he's had a plus differential. Now, while that could definitely help the Bulls, and I look at that and saying, that help Dalen Terry, help Amadas Bucilis, help Julian Phillips, help Jalen Smith when you're with that bench unit, because they could do wonders with having Lonzo Ball there. I want to be clear there. But Lonzo could absolutely turn into a decent trade piece for the Chicago Bulls when you factor in those metrics and teams looking at it and saying, hey, this is pretty low cost. And then we can then turn around and sign him to a 1-year prove-it deal at the end of the season, and then we'll have his bird rights on top of that. Be on the lookout. Like, if the Bulls truly are, and I'll keep saying if because I want to give a grain of salt to every rumor from every writer that's out there, but if the Bulls truly are at the position right now where they're looking to potentially move on from Zoe, there's some data that could point to that. It just becomes about our teams not as concerned about the injury history of Lonzo Ball And if they are, would they more so rather wait into the offseason and let the Chicago Bulls continue to be the testing ground there for what Lonzo is going to look like and how many games he's going to play upon his return, and then teams can go after him in unrestricted free agency next year, right? So we'll see where that comes to as well. But with that said, all the trade talk, the Bulls do have a game today. This one's against the Brooklyn Nets. This is a team that's already beat the Chicago Bulls, but this is a team also that has been much better this season than a lot of people gave them credit for, me included, coming into the season. Now, yes, they're 9-12 on the season. They got one more wins than the Chicago Bulls, but we're talking about a team that people didn't think may not have 9 wins by February, much less, at this point. Now, they do have a lot of players questionable for this game. The Brooklyn Nets have Dorian Finney-Smith, Zaire Williams, Cameron Johnson, and Ben Simmons all listed as questionable coming into this game, with Cam Thomas, Noah Clowney, and Day'Ron Sharpe all already listed as out. Bojan Bogdanovic is as well out. He's going to be out for a while anyway there too. So this is a team that's really depleted. They're missing the player that killed us in the last game in Cam Thomas. And so you want the Bulls to hopefully get a win in this game when it comes down to it against the Brooklyn Nets. But as we know, the Bulls can overlook no opponent at all. And even with the Brooklyn Nets missing pieces, they've still won 3 out of their last 5 games, right? Which I would love to be able to say that about the Chicago Bulls. Now, I'm not going to get heavy into the weeds as far as the stats because they are potentially missing so much of who their team is. But the Bulls have to be, and they have to with every game, they got to be locked in offensively. They really have to be locked in offensively. Now, the Bulls have had some games in which they've given more effort defensively. I think that can definitely help this team. But we know that this team's bread and butter is offense. Offense for this Bulls team. When you look at it, the Bulls are averaging 118.5 points per game, right? They're 4th in the NBA in points per game. Now, we're the worst defensive team in the NBA. We're giving up the most points per game at 124. So that's why the Bulls, like, their margin for error is very, very small. You look at the Brooklyn Nets, they're solid. They're right in the middle of the pack defensively. They give up 114 points per game. And so that's what you really got to look at. They also shoot a lot of threes. They make them at a really good percentage as well, so you got to be locked in for that one. And the Brooklyn Nets aren't a team that turns the ball over a lot either, right? They're in the top 12 as far as fewest turnovers in the league. So the Bulls really have to be on their P's and Q's in this game and every game. We've talked about it. The Bulls' margin for error is very small to start off with. Now, with this team missing as many pieces, that is what I think the Brooklyn Nets are clearly about to go into tank mode very, very actively. They're probably going to trade off a lot of their pieces as well. So that's what it comes down to there. But the Bulls need to get this win. And I think that, regardless, I know there are people that look at every win as a loss and every loss as a win. And that's a story for another day. I'm just talking about the basketball court aspect of it. The Bulls need to go out here and get this dub against the Brooklyn Nets. And if they don't, man, at home in Chicago at that, yeah, get that dub, y'all. Get the dub. All right, with that said, man, we got some overflow from the voicemail bag this weekend that I want to clear out so we can start off fresh this week. We got 2 voicemails. This first voicemail, this one's from Reginald.
Hey, this is Reginald from Columbus, Georgia. I was just listening to you talking about the best lineup the Bulls have down on the floor right now. And I got to admit that depending on what particular person is on the floor at the time, if you're going to have someone, like, maybe it's time to make that starting lineup change and, stagger the minutes like you said. But maybe a controversial idea would be to have Lonzo Ball in the starting lineup for like the first 50 minutes of a quarter just to get the offense in the flow of things and, have someone out there to coordinate the defense. Because we've seen it time and time again where the Bulls get off to a slow start or play zero defense whatsoever. They start turning the ball over. It always starts in the first quarter and then everything else goes horribly wrong. Next thing you know, they're down by like 18 or 20 at the end of the first quarter and the team score 40 points. In this situation, you'll have Lonzo's defense and be able to coordinate. Maybe you have Josh Giddey on the court at the same time, but I don't know. I think he needs to have at least 2 defenders on the court with him just to balance it out. Like whenever Patrick Williams get back, you can have a starting 5 of Boots, T. Will, Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball, and Giddey. And it might be good enough to cover for his defensive weakness. But I think you got to put Kobe White on the bench at the moment simply because if he's not shooting the ball consistently well, and you just can't trust him. He's not a good enough defensive player to cover up for having a bad shooting night. Because if the shooting is not falling, then defensively, teams are going to target him and he's going to struggle. But at this point in time, I don't know if making a major change to the starting lineup will help. But if there was to be a change, it probably would be Lonzo Ball to start off the game. But what's your opinion?
All right, here's the thing though. Like the offense isn't a problem. And Reginald, while I just talked about the stats, like Lonzo's positive when he's on the court. The fact is that you're just not going to start a player that's on a minutes restriction, even though he played over 20 minutes when he was only supposed to. I think Billy said he was on like a 16-minute restriction. So they're showing some ability to go over that. But then also it's the back-to-back nature of it. And the Bulls have a back-to-back this week with Thursday and Friday. Thursday being my birthday, they have a back-to-back, right? So with all those things said, I just don't think that you're going to see this team really start Lonzo Ball. I just don't think that is something they're going to do. I think you're more likely to start Ayo Dosunmu over Zoe because he doesn't have those things. And a lot of people are with you as far as the growing sentiment that Kobe White needs to come off the bench. I'm not necessarily there, but, I understand the merits in that. And so if anybody starts and you move Kobe to the bench, it's going to be Ayo. It's not going to really be Lonzo Ball. I just don't think it's going to be that because of the reasons that we mentioned here. But, we'll see if a change to the starting lineup comes. It would be one of the more interesting things Billy Donovan has done coaching-wise to make a change, such a substantial change to the starting lineup without it being injury-based. So, we'll see what happens there, but, we'll see. The lineups point towards, like I said, either way, it's either Kobe and Ayo or Josh Giddey and Ayo. The numbers and analytics show that it's better when Ayo's out there with those guys rather than Giddey and Kobe be out there together. And that's something that the Bulls are also going to have to look at as they go into this offseason and look at extending Josh Giddey or not. But great voicemail, Reginald. Thank you for leaving that. Let's get into this next one. This one's from Shay.
Yo, Haize, what's up, man? Look, I'm not saying, you know me, I'm not usually one that does trade talks or anything like that, but I think the Chicago Bulls might need to consider making a move for Walker Kessler. Now, look, man, I'm not saying that trade Zach LaVine straight up for him. I'm not saying give up a first-round pick for him, but I mean, for either 3 seconds, or if we got a player that the Utah Jazz could want, that we don't have to sacrifice none of our young guys, I say we should look to go get him. Now, look, I know you're not too thrilled on Walker Kessler. That's cool and that's good, whatever. But at the same time, I don't know if we are going to get a center in the draft. And the way I see it, we are moving to a situation where we need to play a lot of young guys. And Walker Kessler does fit this timeline, and I feel that he could help with a lot of our reputation going down the future. Maybe not this year, but I feel like he could help. So the way I see it, hey, man, I say we should look to get him because I don't know about any centers in this upcoming draft or next draft. And honestly, do you really trust Jaden Smith? I know we made a promise to Jaden Smith, and that's why he signed here, but do you really trust him over a guy like Walker Kessler, who we could get, especially if we do some flexing around the move, maybe not 2 second-round picks like I said earlier in this call, but we could at least try to get him. And then plus on top of that, he fits our timeline. But hey, you probably thinking different. Anyway, tell me what you think. Peace.
Making a move for Walker Kessler would more so be the type of move that the Bulls make if they're still trying to win now this season. And the reason why I say that is this. You're right. Like, Walker Kessler can help going forward, but there are centers in this draft. There's one center in this draft that, if the Bulls do keep their top 10 pick and aren't in the top 5 in Malowick, that actually helps the Bulls in every area that they need to be in. So I don't think that the Bulls are, if they do make trades at this trade deadline, it's not about targets for the Chicago Bulls. And I think a lot of people need to understand and come to grasp with that, right? It's not about, we're making this move because we're targeting this player. No, it's about we're making this move because this is the most that we can get back. And the target is keeping their top 10 pick and maybe gaining some more assets down the road as well. That's what the target is. I would not be mad at Walker Kessler on this roster by any stretch of the imagination. I actually think, I'm still at the point where probably drafting him over Dalen Terry would have probably been the right move at that point in time, but it is what it is. Dalen Terry's rounding out to a solid bench defense energy guy, so I'm not mad at that at all. But you look at what Walker Kessler brings shot blocking wise, and I also think that Walker Kessler is a guy that he's going to be a walking double-double with still getting 2. He's averaging almost 3 blocks per game this season. So, yeah, Walker Kessler is a talent. I do like Walker Kessler. I just don't think that if the Bulls were to make moves, that they're making moves targeting specific players, they're targeting assets. And players can be assets as well. I just don't think I do think that if Walker Kessler is available and he hasn't been moved in the offseason, depending on where the Bulls sit in the draft and move off some other pieces, that may be where you can see them maybe targeting somebody like Walker Kessler. But I think you're going to want to get through that draft first, in my personal opinion. But we'll see where it goes. Great voicemail, Shay. That's my time for today, guys. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.